Getting so close. All right, let us begin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. We are going to continue with our coffee talk conversation over here. We're going through different proofs, different, intellectual ideas that help support the veracity of Torah. And we spoke over the last few weeks about the idea that Torah is not enough to just have a belief in Torah itself, that we need to go ahead and move ourselves from a place of belief to a place of knowledge, of knowing. And we went through different arguments that we were presenting. Remember, there's no one argument that makes the case for you. You need to collect all the different pieces of evidence. And together with all those different pieces, we walk away with getting hopefully the clarity we need to move from a place of faith into a place of knowledge. So let's go through some of these predictions. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the prophecies that were indicated in the Torah, and what they're, I believe, arguing is that the Torah itself had to have been given by someone who had knowledge outside of human ability, meaning there is always going to be some information that you could guess, but there's certain things you can never predict. There's some things that are always going to be somewhat elusive, that mankind can never go ahead and fully understand and appreciate. So the Torah itself has all sorts of predictions that a human being could not have conceivably known or predicted. So for example, the generation that received the Torah at Mount Sinai, it says in the Torah that they were going to die out over 40 years. The next generation is going to come along and inherit the land of Eretz Yisrael. They're going to come in, they're going to conquer the Canaanites, and then they're going to divide the land in a very specific way to the tribes. There are a tremendous number of very precise variables that could have happened in a very different way. Right? The fate of the entire first and second generations and the outcomes of the wars of the Canaanites, right? How do you know that? How do you make a prediction that this is how it's going to happen so early on in your history without fully appreciating the extent of the ability for all these things to not happen, right? There's so many things that could go wrong in battle, so many things that could happen. Why would you go ahead and write things down that will easily falsify your claims of the Torah being true? There are other prophecies that are included in the Torah, like anti-Semitism. The Jewish people will always remain small in numbers. The Jewish people will be scattered all over the earth. We're living that right now. It's obvious. We see it and we know it. Despite the great anti-Semitism and hatred that the Jews will face, they will always survive. Okay, they will always remember the Torah, and that the Western Wall will never be destroyed. Okay, these are all prophecies that have, stood up to the test of time. Not only does the Torah make these general predictions, but it also makes very detailed predictions about very specific events. So the detailed description of the destruction of both temples are written out in the Tanakh. A description of the nation who will destroy the second temple is there. The Jews will be taken to Egypt by ships and sold as slaves. These are very specific types of predictions. Now, in Devarim, there is a prediction of what will happen to the Jewish people if they don't live up to the standard of the Torah. It predicts conquest accompanied by horrible slaughter of a population of men, women, children, old, young. It predicts an exile resulting in worldwide scatter, that during this period of worldwide scatter, Jews will have no independent government. One result of the exile is that some Jews will be brought back by boat to Egypt or sold as slaves, and then they will not be purchased. How humiliating. Oh, there's a Jew in the marketplace, I'm not buying that. Regardless, the Jewish people will survive, they will never be completely destroyed, and will ultimately return to the land of Israel. That's very specific. It also predicts that the conqueror will speak a language that the Jewish people don't understand. So now, what's crucial about this prediction is that it should be a unique prediction. a prediction that no one else could explain. Because if it's a prediction that other people can explain, then it no longer functions as a crucial prediction. And therefore, it has to be very, very specific, so that we can go ahead and use this information to distinguish between what you are claiming and what others can claim. Meaning, what makes this particular prediction unique? And if there's nothing unique about it, because anyone can make this prediction, then who cares? So let's ask ourselves each about the details in this prediction. So whether they came true or could have been explained by a sociological analysis of the times or by competing ideology, or whether it's something that someone could explain only from the Jewish point of view, let's try to go ahead and make some sense of it. Now, if Muslims and Christians accept the book of Devarim and predict that the Jews will be exiled as a result of the failure of the Torah, right? When that prediction comes true, it does not give Christianity or Islam positive evidence against Judaism, right? Since we all agree on that prediction. Now, let's see which of these predictions could have been explained by an observer with a point of view other than the Torah, right? The prediction of conquest is not very difficult to say that you're going to be conquered, big deal. Everyone gets conquered sooner or later. So now, there was a prediction of the total destruction, decimation of a population and exile. Okay, that was rare in the ancient world. It happened, but it was rare because the purpose of the conquest was always economic. So typically, it was a question of acquiring colonies and taxing them. You can't tax people if you slaughter them. It was bad business to just come in and kill everybody and then exile them. Now, I'm not talking about theft. Of course, you want to take all the gold, the silver, the gems, the fine linens, and so on and so forth. But you can take the young, the fine, the strong men and sell them off as slaves. But you don't wantonly slaughter the rest of the population because there's no point in destroying your tax base. Why would you do that? During their 300 years of rule, Romans did this only to Carthage and the Jews. So, the prediction of, wanton slaughter of a population and exile were predictions that could not be anticipated because they were not the normal, methodology, procedure of the ancient world. No one did this. Why would you do this? This is horrible. Now, let's take the prediction of conquering. Okay, the conqueror will speak a language that you don't understand. Why should I think that? Who's going to conquer you? Neighboring, countries typically understood one another's language. There was enough commerce and travel for each to be familiar with the language of the other. Couldn't we have been conquered by a neighbor? Couldn't we have been conquered by a country that spoke an international language? Many Jews understood Greek. Greek was, in those days, similar to what English is today. Business contracts, diplomacy were conducted in the Greek language. Any Greek-speaking nations conquered and exiled us, right? And any Greek-speaking nation conquered and exiled us. Now, this prediction would have been false. But the Romans conquered us, and they spoke Latin, and Latin was a language which the Jews were not familiar with. So it was a very specific type of language. Now, if a nation is going to be exiled, who says that they're going to end up all over the world? You're going to exile them from one place to another place. Right? Not everyone who was exiled from their country ended up with, identifiable communities. Not everyone who was exiled from their countries ended up with, in Babylonian 500 years earlier, right? We didn't end up all over the world. The vast majority of the population was taken to Babylon. A large group went to Alexandria in Egypt. There are many places in the world without, identifiable groups of Jews. Now, if they were going to end up in exile, how could one predict with confidence that some of them will be taken to Egypt in boats and sold, and that there will not be anyone to buy them? Why should one think that? It's true there was a slave trade flourishing and there were known slave routes, but who is to say that it would definitely happen? If you're going to predict exile, scatter all over the world, how can you be sure that at no point Well, any Jewish society from an independent government in some portion of some portion on the Earth's surface. Don't forget, we're talking about 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, the world wasn't organized with maps and boundaries and lines so that every square meter of the Earth's surface belonged to one nation or another, and sometimes two or three nations. Now, on the contrary, I would say that there were vast areas of the Earth's surface that were unclaimed. They were unsettled, and they were simply wild, and they belonged to no one. So, for example, parts of Russia, North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, Central Africa, who is to say that Jewish exiles would not form an independent society in one of those places? Now, that means that for each of these predictions, if I don't have a Jewish perspective and I took it neutrally, or I look at it as a Buddhist or a Hindu or an atheist, I would expect them not to occur. I would not be able to explain them if they did occur. That's very important, right? How do we get to this clarity? Now, if I was going to assign, oh boy, I forgot to stream this. If I was going to assign a probability for each of these detailed predictions from any of those non-Jewish points of view, the probability would be very low. The total destruction and exile, let's say, that occurred in 10% of all ancient worlds. Then you have a non-Jewish observer. He would probably say the probability of that is 1 out of 10. How often did the conqueror speak an unknown language? Well, we don't know. Neighbors did fight. Languages of great empires were widely known. So let's say, let's be very generous for a moment and say that it happened a quarter of the time, giving us a probability of 1 out of 4. Now, being scattered, all over the world as a result of exile, as far as I know, it didn't happen at all to anybody. Now, I suppose the probability should be 0, but let's be generous and give it a probability of 1 out of 10. Now, to take a nation that is scattered all over the world and unable to organize itself into an independent society, I don't know if that probability I don't know. So I'll also say it's 1 out of 4. So to survive under these conditions and return to one's land has never happened in the history of the world. And therefore I give that a probability of 0. And so let's just say, for the sake of this conversation, let's just give it a generous 1 out of 10 probability. Now, when you have a prediction for the sequence of events, and each event has a probability, and you want to know the probability of all of them coming true, you multiply the probability. So you'd multiply 1 out of 10 by 1 quarter, and 1/10 out of 1 quarter, 1/10, and we come out with a probability of 1 out of 16,000. That's a very small number. That is the confidence of a neutral observer would have in this prediction. Now, what is the likelihood that a prediction like this could come true? Well, 1 chance in every 16,000 tries. Now, give the evidence the observer had to go on. There is no way for him to explain why it came true, but it happened. Now, that being the case, this is what we called earlier a unique prediction. It's a prediction whose truth no one else can explain. Had anyone seen the prediction before it happened, the response would have been that this is fantasy. Therefore, when it comes true, it contributes to the truth of Judaism, and it is a relevant piece of evidence. The probability of these things, think about it. When you go through, whatever, they're going to be small in numbers, they're going to be scattered, we're going to throw them all over the place, they're going to be sold, no one's going to purchase them. A conquering nation that doesn't speak their language, whatever, big deal. They're not big deals. They're not small. They're not small deals. They're big deals. These are very important things that we need to clarify for ourselves. When we read the Torah and we are hearing it giving us verification, a source of information that is verifiable, that we could go back and say, hey, does this fit into modern thinking? And the answer is it doesn't. Then we're begged to ask the question, well, how would they do this? Why would you write information in the Torah that is easily falsifiable unless your information was coming from a outside source and you were certain it would come true? And there's no way to be certain about anything. Now, apart from the prophecies that were fulfilled, the authenticity of the Torah comes from a number of mitzvot that no human being can establish, right? Because I would say they're extraordinary in their scope, and they would even endanger the Jewish people. An example of this would be Shemitah, right? An example of this would be the Ola L'Regel, that every 7 years you have a sabbatical. You have a sabbatical year. You have 3 times of the year you'd come up to Jerusalem. And therefore, these mitzvot could have only been legislated by a higher authority, possessing the ability to provide what we call a bumper crop for the Shemitah year and protection for the nation during the festival. So let's go through Shemitah for a moment. Mitzvah Shemitah and Ola Regel, the pilgrimage festivals, could only have been given by someone who can control nature, right? And history. So if Moshe invented the Torah, he would have been a fool to include these laws, right? Because after the first Shemitah, the whole nation would go hungry. There's no food. And Moshe would have been revealed to be a charlatan. You trickster, why would you do this to us? And similarly, with the Ola Regel, the pilgrimage festival, after the nation surrounded Israel, realized that 3 times a year, it doesn't take very long to scout out another people and understand their rules and laws. But 3 times out of the year, the entire nation abandons their post. Okay, the cities are undefended. Everyone goes to Jerusalem, right? They would have invaded on the next festival, occupied the whole country, sieged Jerusalem, and finished the whole entire nation in one swoosh. Right? Total national disaster would have developed. The whole thing would have fallen apart. Why would you take on something that could create a catastrophe for your people? Now, there's 2 ways of seeing this. Number one is, why would the people accept it? They weren't dumb. Like Jews reading this, like, you want me to spend 3 times a year leaving my post, leaving my wife and children behind, exposing them to the forces around us? And you want me to take a pilgrimage to Jerusalem? Are you nuts? Who's going to protect my family? We're not talking about America 2020, where you could walk down the street and not worry about a bandit of thieves, mugging you. Although, unfortunately, these times are changing. But most of us don't have that fear or experience. Okay? But in those worlds, it was very common for people to walk down the street and all sorts of things would happen and it would be terrifying. Now, the pasuk in Vayikra says, "Sheshanim tizra sadecha." 6 years you shall sow your field, but in the 7th year will be a Shabbat. Shana hashvi'i Shabbat Shabbaton yela aretz. Now, this is how we explain it. If you're going to say that we should eat in the 7th year, the Torah says, don't worry about it. We're not going to sow or gather in produce. God will command a special blessing on the 6th year, and in the 4th year, in 4 years, there's going to be a double amount of grain, so that in the year 8, you're going to have a double amount of crops. Okay, and the amount of crops you're going to have will go from 7, 8 to 9. You do Shemitah, and I'm going to give you 3 bonus crops. Okay, now. There could be, I get this a lot. Maybe there's a agricultural evidence that Jews were super smart when it came to farming, and they understood how to hack the natural cycle of the earth. But what's interesting is that we've seen that when we try Shemitah in other places around the world, it just doesn't work. It's unique to the land of Israel. It's unique to the land of Israel, that only in the land of Israel this particular process works. So you have Ola Regel. 3 times a year you're going to travel in mass to Yerushalayim. Okay, Torah says that Shlosh Pamim B'Shana Yira Kol Zechurcha Et Pnei Hadon Hashem Elokei Yisrael. everyone's got to come up. Okay? Rav Shamshon Rav Hirsch says that every soldier will be gathered at the center point in Jerusalem at the temple. Okay? And that no covetous enemy will dare to cross our border into the rich and protected land lying open before them. Israel's land will not be protected by an army at all, but from the acknowledgement of God. Are you crazy? It's like saying, I'm not going to lock the doors of my house. I'm not going to lock the doors of my car. I'm not going to have a safe. I leave everything open, and I'm going to allow God to go ahead and watch over me and protect me. That's a very high level of craziness, but it's certainly not a high level of emunah. Okay? Emunah means that you're smart enough to know that you do your hishtadlut. Okay? Why would you go ahead and take on this mitzvah if it would expose you to death? The Torah says, Tishmor and nafshecha me'od. You got to value your life very, very much. So if the Torah felt that you were putting yourself into some sort of physical danger, right, you would not be required to fulfill that command. But yet somehow the Jews had a special bracha that we would defy the laws of nature here. We would walk away from our borders and not worry about people coming and attacking us. Who would make such a claim? Either a madman who wants to destroy these poor, crazy people for accepting these beliefs, or a brilliant genius who can somehow ensure that they have control over nature and history. How else do you explain it? I'm waiting for pushback. I would love to hear pushback because I've been thinking about these things and I've yet to hear a great argument against it. So the text itself, right, has a tremendous amount of evidence as well. Okay, we spoke about the idea of the dishonesty and the bias of classical ancient sources, right? Often a general that lost a war would say that he won a war. Often a king would say that he enslaved X amount of people, when in reality he lost his slaves. Can't trust everything that we read. But the accuracy of the text is confirmed by the honesty in which the Torah criticizes the Jewish nation. You find me anywhere in the texts of the Christian New Testament or in the in Islam's I'm blanking on their book, the Quran. Thank you. The Quran. You find me two places in the New Testament and the Quran which explains that the people made mistakes and they were punished. You show me a place where they criticize their leaders, I'll give you $100. Okay, you won't find it. Now, history is most often changed by the desire of national scribes, right? Because they want to put their country in the most positive light possible. And if that means a massive rewrite of their history, they're willing to do it. Even in our time, we witnessed it. Communists, right? They've completely rewritten history. Arab, Nazis, and other countries manipulate and distort history to place themselves in the best light possible. Not so the Torah. The Torah doesn't do this. There's no whitewashing of the Jewish people in the Torah anywhere. One could even argue that so much of the pain and suffering that Jews have gone through throughout exile has been the Torah's, very clear, poignant criticism of the Jewish people. See, it says you guys are a stiff-necked people. It's true, right? You guys are punished by God. It's true. Time and time again, the Jews are shown doing all kinds of chataim, transgressing, doubting Moshe, even God, being punished for it, and so on and so forth. The golden calf, right? The incident of the complainers in the desert, the plague, Korach, right? The Mei Merivah, the waters of contention, Kozbi and Pinchas, Mikashkesh Etzim. All these are examples of Am Yisrael doing all kinds of chetaim and Hashem coming out and punishing them. There's no hiding it. Why would they put that in there? Not only is it true of the nation as a whole, but also of our heroes. The Torah and the leaders of the people. The Torah says that Miriam and Aaron were speaking Lashon Hara about Moshe. Can you imagine today you have like an article that comes out and says, the greatest gadol, the greatest, chacham is coming out and he's doing a sin publicly? The Torah has no problem doing that. Moshe is criticized for not sanctifying God when he struck the rock. No other nation has been willing to portray its negative side in the name of historical truth. That is not true for our book. That is not true for the thing that we read 3 times a week, Monday, Thursday, Shabbat, right? We read it 3 times a week. It's clear. The Torah itself was there, given by someone who is not afraid of being critical and not afraid of being true, because we say the Torah is emet. And if it is emet, there can't be any room for anything sheker. It has to be true. One of the most remarkable phenomenon of world history is the survival of the Jewish people, right? Against all the odds. Without power or autonomy, scattered across the entire globe, the Jews have proved eternal, while other powers and cultures completely vanished. The prediction of this alone, to me, is extraordinary. This survival underscores its divine source. How could you guarantee survival? We're talking about an ancient culture. Where are the Greeks today? Where are the Romans? Where are the Babylonians? Where are the Persians? Where are these nations today? These big, big people, they're gone. Pasuk in Bereshit says, "Vehikimoti et briti beini u'beinecha u'bein zarecha acharecha ledorotam lebrit olam liyod lacha elokim zarecha acharecha." I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout the generations, an everlasting covenant that I will be God for you and your descendants after you. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, this is the Kuzari, he says that the source of our survival under the present circumstances of dispersion, remember he wrote this in the 13th century, okay? He says that it is inconceivable that any other nation could have survived as long as we have. Think about all the things that we've gone through, the assimilating of the other nations, the assimilating of our people, the challenges, the laws set up against us, against all the odds, right? What happened to Edom? What happened to Moab? What happened to Ammon, Aram, the Philistines, the Persians? Where are all those people today? They're gone, right? This is a great quote that you're all familiar with, but I think is apropos right now from Mark Twain. And he says that the statistics are right. The Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. The truth is it's less. It's like 0.25% of the human race. And therefore, he says like this is a great line. He says, it suggests a nebulous dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. He says, the Jews ought hardly be heard of, but he is heard of. He's always been heard of. He is prominent on the planet as any other people. And his commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine are way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He's made a marvelous fight in this world. In all the ages, he has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persians rose and filled the world with sound and splendor, and then faded into dream stuff and passed away. The Greek, the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now, or have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he has always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert, aggressive mind. All things are mortal, but the Jew. All forces pass, but he remains. And this is how he ends. What is the secret of his immortality? This is Mark Twain, who was an anti-Semite. He was no friend of the Jewish people. That was Mark Twain. And he ends with, what is the secret of his immortality? What is it? I'm going to say Borei Olam. I'm going to say there's someone in the sky who's watching over us. There's something beyond human understanding happening here because we make no sense. We shouldn't be here on the Zoom call having this conversation right now. We should be something else, but not this. But not only are we here having this conversation, tomorrow night, we're going to be pulling out our Chanukiahs. We're going to be pulling out our little candelabras and lighting them in front of our doors. Can you imagine that 2,200 years ago, a bunch of Jews in Jerusalem, these little puny, Kohanim, stood up to the most powerful nation on planet Earth at the time, the Greeks, these chiseled Herculean men walking around bare-chested with their spears, were trained to murder and kill at the age of 5. What were they thinking? Jewish survival is miraculous. And I'm going to tuck it into part of the evidence for the divine nature of the Torah itself. What I want to do is just very briefly, just go very quickly, the idea, there's one other point here that I think is important to mention, that when we look at the Torah itself, the scroll, the text, right? How many different versions of Torah scrolls will you find on planet Earth? You can imagine, remember, this is not photocopied, this is not printed. Back then you had a scribe who took out his pen and he literally wrote out every single letter, every single line. Can you imagine the Torah has something like 300,000 letters in it? And here you are taking a scribe at a time when there's no electricity. He's got to find his quill and his ink. He's got to make his ink. He's got to find his paper. And he's got to write this stuff down by memory. You think there must be hundreds of copies of the Chumash, the Torah, around the world. But that's not what we find. Right? We don't find that. We don't find hundreds of copies of our Torah. There are 4 unique versions of the Torah, and out of the 4, there are 7 differences. This is not like, I'm not talking about like the New Testament where there are 100 different versions and different stories with different outcomes. I'm talking about 7 minor differences. And those differences are 7 letters. And they're all the letters that are in question are vowels. And therefore, you can spell the word color with a C-O-L-O-R, or if you were a Brit, you would spend it with a U at the end. Okay, now phonetically, the word sounds exactly the same. The meaning would not be lost. That's the only difference that we have here. The oldest Torah, for many years, when Jews would go up and debate against Christian scholars, the debates would often end with, well, we have the oldest text around, and therefore our text is more credible than your text. Today, we have Dead Sea Scrolls that are older than Christianity. Christianity is 2,000 years old. We have Dead Sea Scrolls that are 2,300 years old that are from the time of the Chashmonaim, from the time of the Hanukkah story. And we have parts of the Chumashim. We have the stories. We have the text. Do we find different texts? Do we find different stories that contradict what we find in the Torah? Or do they all corroborate and prove that the text itself has maintained its truth, its true identity? And the answer is yes. That basically throughout history, all we find is scroll after scroll adding to this idea. Remember, if a Torah scroll is missing a letter, it's not kosher. A Torah scroll is it has a letter that's deleted from it, it's not kosher. The scribe himself has to be someone who's learned, he's got to be pious, he has to go special training for certification. The ink, the quill, all have to have very specific rules on how they are constructed. Okay, a scribe cannot put one letter in the Torah by heart. Everything that he sees has to be copied from another kosher scroll that has to be verified that it was kosher. The scribe has to pronounce every single word out loud before copying it from the correct text. Every letter has to have a sufficient amount of white space. You can't just chug all the letters. Poorly written scrolls are not kasher. Okay, if one letter touches another letter in any spot, the whole entire scroll is pasul. It's invalidated. You can't use it. If a single letter was so marred that it cannot be read, or it resembles another letter, pasul. The scribe has to put a precise amount of space between the words so that the word will look like its own word and not join between two words. Not have that, not kasher. The scribe is not allowed to alter the design of the sections. That's the way we break up the actual parshiot. It has to conform to a particular line length and paragraph configurations. They don't have that. Boom, pasul. You have it all there, amazing. A Torah scroll, which in any mistake is found in that Torah scroll, cannot be used. It has to be fixed within 30 days or buried. Okay, very, very strict rules for the Torah. But when you look at other documents, my friends, like the Christian Bible, which has about the same amount of words as the Torah, okay, the Christian Bible is about 1,700 years younger than the Torah scroll. Okay? The Christians haven't gone through as much exile. They have not gone through the pain and the embarrassment of being thrown around and scattered across the world. Christians have always had a central authority, the Vatican. So there's no reason for them to have different types of texts, but we were doing all this under duress. So what are the results? Okay, there's the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible. This is a book that was written to prove the validity of the New Testament, says that a study of 150 Greek manuscripts of the Gospel of Luke revealed more than 30,000 different readings. Not 30,000 different readings. This is 1,700 years ago versus 3,300 years ago. I mean, okay. Other scholars say there are about 200,000 variants in the existing manuscripts of the New Testament. Therefore, there are about 400 variant readings, which cause a tremendous doubt of the textual meaning, right? So therefore, that's big. I'm not talking about small things. Okay, there are 7 spelling variants with absolutely no effect of the meaning of the word. But the Christian Bible has over 200,000 variants and 400 instances where it actually changes the meaning of the text. Okay, how's that? So the idea, the fact that you have the point of this isn't to go ahead and to denigrate Christianity, God forbid, but rather I'm using this comparison to demonstrate the remarkable accuracy of the Jewish transmission of the Torah. That's what this is. By the way, you can do the same thing with any other ancient manuscript. You'll find that there are hundreds of different variants that give us a completely different reading. So let's just close up this coffee talk and try to draw some conclusions over here. One is that I'm going to argue that the author of the Torah was not a human being. Okay, there's no way he could have known these things and guaranteed it. There's no way that if you were coming up with a religion and making this up from scratch, you would not put ideas, mitzvot, laws into the Torah that potentially could destroy your nation, your new founding people. Okay, and beyond that, you see that the text itself supports its own accuracy, that it is a more accurate text than any of the other texts around in the planet that are younger, that should have been in a state of better preservation than our own text, because we were all over the place. You would think that a Jew writing a Torah scroll in Egypt would look very different than a Jew writing a Torah scroll in Iran, or in Iraq, or in Lebanon, or Syria, or in Spain, or in France, or in England. But they're all the same. How does that happen? What is the secret of the immortality of the Jew? Hanukkah is a reminder that we, as a Jewish people, recognize that true value comes from depth. True beauty is not what we see externally. Now, those things always fade. But true beauty has to do with the inner work of who we are as people. It has to do with our character development. It has to do with our thinking of being aware of the people's needs around us. It has to do with a deep desire to want to be great in everything that we do. The Torah is not just a book of laws and rules that are designed to enslave you and take you away from your freedoms. God forbid. The Torah itself is a book that was designed to ensure that you are able to achieve the greatest levels of happiness and success in everything that you do. And it has a built-in system of brachot. You do these things and you're going to be rewarded. You do these things and you will find yourself living a life of happiness. Ignore these things and you're going to deal with the pain and suffering of subscribing to superficiality. Chanukah is a reminder that the way you win wars is by lighting small candles. That the way you build a nation is not by putting out big torches that say Hanukkah, Happy Hanukkah all over the world. You do small little things, and where do you put it? I think about it for a moment. Everything in Judaism is done in the home. Everything's in the home. It's family based. It's our family. Pesach is in the home. You're having the seder at house. You're asking the questions. The Rosh Hashanah, you're having your meal. It's in the home. Sukkot, you're eating something with the family in a sukkah. Purim, you're having your seudah. Shavuot, you're having everything's in the home. But Hanukkah, what do? It's the only holiday where you put something in the window trying to show the world that it's not the big things that brings meaning into the world. If you want to destroy the darkness that surrounds the world, the way you do it is by doing small little acts of kindness, small little chesed, small little lights have the power of destroying all the darkness. May we be blessed with the clarity of that knowledge. May we only share in each other's smachot. May we end the exile that separates us in space and in time. And God willing, this year, 2020, be the end of this pandemic. We get to Yerushalayim hand in hand, dancing with smachot, and watching our temple that we so desperately want to see rebuilt, and no longer having the doubts that we carry with ourselves, preventing us from feeling so positive and confident in everything that we do Jewishly. Have a great week. Wishing you all a Chanukah Sameach. Thank you so much for listening. Kol Tuv.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening.
Tonight I'm going to watch you.
God willing, we'll be there tonight. That's right, 7:30 tonight, everybody. We're going to be live at the Safra Synagogue. You're more than welcome to come down and join us on 63rd Street. We will have social distancing and masks. It's nice to see people in person. But if you can't be there in person, you'll definitely find us on the live stream. We'll be on Torah anytime. And we'll be on Torah anytime. And we'll also be on Facebook and Instagram and so on and so forth.
But who's going to talk first?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. We usually figure that out when we get there, when we're all standing there together.
Because here is going to be in the middle of the night.
Rabbi Farhi will probably go last, because he always does. Either Rabbi Mizrahi or Rabbi Haji will go first. Rabbi Hajjaf will go first. I go last or second. I go second or third. Rabbi Farhi is always last, so we always switch off like that. We'll figure it out.
Perfect. Very nice.
Pleasure. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Be well. You choose.